For 46 years, the sight of Mongol horsemen on the horizon had meant only one thing to Poles: run, hide, and pray. In February 1241, a Mongol tumen of 10,000 riders had torn through southern Poland, destroying Polish armies piecemeal before they could unite, burning Krakow, and then crushing Duke Henry II, the Pious at Legnica, with a feigned retreat that lured his cavalry into a flanking ambush. Henry died on the field, and the Mongols paraded his severed head on a spear. 18 years later, General Burundi returned with 20,000 men, this time not to raid but to punish. Sandomierz, Krakow, Lublin, and several other towns were sacked and burned in turn. Between that second invasion and 1287, Poland quietly transformed itself. Wooden palisades became stone walls, earthwork mounds became brick keeps and towers. Polish lords had absorbed a hard lesson: never meet Mongol horse archers in open ground, where they could circle and shoot you to pieces. Instead, force them to besiege fortifications, or fight in terrain where their horses couldn't maneuver. That lesson was tested again in November 1287, when Nogai Khan, the real power behind the Western Golden Horde, summoned his Ruthenian vassal princes and ordered an invasion, ostensibly to punish Duke Leszek II, the Black, for meddling in Hungarian and Ruthenian affairs, but really because Poland was rich, divided, and ripe for plunder. Nogai split his forces into two columns. 20,000 cavalry under the younger, less experienced Talabuga Khan would strike from the northeast toward Sandomierz, while Nogai himself led 10,000 elite Mongol and Turkic horsemen south toward Krakow. The plan was simple: loot fast, avoid long sieges, and meet north of Krakow before riding home. Facing them was Leszek, 46 years old, and Duke of Krakow since 1279, ruling a fractured patchwork of competing Polish duchies that nonetheless always closed ranks against a Mongol threat. He commanded roughly 15,000 men, mostly heavy cavalry split between field forces and city garrisons, and he had a proven record fending off Galician, Lithuanian, and Yotvingian incursions through sheer stubborn persistence rather than clever maneuvering. He also had an ally. King Ladislaus IV of Hungary sent an expeditionary force under Voivode George Baksa, drawing on Hungary's own recent experience, repelling a Mongol invasion in 1285, using exactly the same defensive playbook Poland was about to deploy. The terrain Leszek chose to fight in was the Świętokrzyski Mountains, old, worn-down hills rarely topping 600 meters, but thick with beech and fir forest, steep loose quartzite slopes, and snow piled waist-deep by December. It was exactly the kind of ground that neutralized everything that made Mongol cavalry dangerous. Their composite bows lost most of their range in forest, with visibility down to 50 meters or less. Their wide and circling maneuvers were impossible in narrow valleys, and their signature feigned retreat tactic only worked if a pursuing enemy had open ground to be lured into, not a single bottleneck trail with nowhere to run. Talabuga's march had already gone wrong before he ever reached the mountains. The Vistula River near Zawichost hadn't frozen solid enough to cross, forcing a time-consuming detour along its bank while Polish scouts tracked his every move. When his column finally reached Sandomierz, he found proper stone fortifications rather than the wooden palisades of 1241, made a half-hearted probe, and pushed on rather than commit to a real siege, heading instead for a fortified abbey deeper in the mountains. On December 20, 1287, his vanguard ran into a Polish ambush in a narrow forest defile near the village of Wachau. Crossbow bolts from hidden infantry scattered his scouts. Talabuga tried the classic Mongol playbook: pull back, draw the Poles into open ground, then encircle them, but Leszek refused to take the bait, advancing his heavy cavalry slowly and methodically through the trees instead of chasing the retreat. With the valley too narrow for the Mongols to spread their wings, Talabuga chose to commit to battle anyway, trusting his numerical edge. It was a fatal miscalculation. Polish knights rode in full-plate armor, weighing some 20 to 25 kilograms, carrying a lance, the drzewo or wood, up to 4.5 meters of ash or oak tipped with steel, that could punch clean through a man and his horse on impact. At close range, that lance shattered the lightly armored Mongol vanguard outright, and once the fighting collapsed into swordwork, Mongol sabers simply couldn't bite through Polish plate the way Polish blades cut through Mongol leather. The cramped terrain compounded the disaster. Only a few hundred Mongols could engage at once no matter how many men Talabuga threw forward, and Mongol commanders, used to coordinating by flags and signals across open steppe, couldn't pass orders through dense, snow-choked woodland. Discipline that had held across 50 years of campaigning began to crack as panic spread down the line. By early afternoon, Talabuga's column broke into a full rout, fleeing south toward Kielce and abandoning supplies and wounded behind them. 4 days later, on December 24th, Nogai's southern column reached Krakow, unaware that Talabuga had already been routed at what became known as the Battle of Legau. He found the city's stone walls intact, its gates shut, and a garrison stocked and ready, nothing like the panicked, wooden-walled Krakow of 1241. With only 10,000 men and no siege equipment capable of breaching the walls, Nogai made the pragmatic call. Rather than commit to a long siege he couldn't sustain through winter, he scattered his force into raiding parties to burn villages and seize livestock across the surrounding countryside. Poland fought back in smaller ways too. Garrison troops sallied out to harass exposed raiding parties and local Highlanders from the Podhale region. The Gorals reportedly drove off a Mongol detachment camped on the Dunajec River using little more than farm tools and hunting bows. By late December, Nogai's scattered raiders converged to besiege the small fortress town of Stary Saks, more out of frustration than strategy. That siege proved fatal for them. In early January 1288, Leszek's army, fresh from victory at Lagau, linked up with Baksa's Hungarians and struck the 1,000-man Mongol siege force at dawn on January 12. Caught entirely by surprise, the besiegers were annihilated in under an hour, their commander killed. With both columns now beaten and winter deepening, Nogai ordered a full withdrawal. The Golden Horde had sent 30,000 warriors into Poland, hoping to repeat the triumphs of 1241 and 1259. Instead, they failed to take a single major city and limped home with negligible plunder. Some troops even raided their own Ruthenian vassals' lands on the way back, a clear sign of how badly the campaign had failed. Duke Leszek died less than a year later, on September 30, 1288, but he had already secured Poland's defensive transformation. Stone fortifications and heavy cavalry fighting on favorable terrain had proven they could beat the Golden Horde. The Mongols never again mounted a major invasion of Poland. Later incursions were limited to border raids rather than full campaigns. The defensive doctrine that won at Lagau and Stary Saks, already validated by Hungary's own victory in 1285, spread across Central Europe as proof that even the largest land empire in history had limits it could not push past. Polish lords took the lesson to heart, pouring resources into the stone castles whose ruins still dot the Świętokrzyski mountains today. A folk tradition in Krakow, the Leszek pageant, even traces its roots to this campaign, commemorating a supposed raid on a Mongol camp outside the city. Almost certainly more legend than fact, but telling in how it cast 1287 not as a brush with disaster, but as proof the Golden Horde could finally be beaten.